I want to talk about the Iran nuclear deal and what it means for U.S. national security with Senator Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, ranking member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thank you so much for being here.
It's good to be with you, John.
Senator, one of the holdups in the negotiations right now, perhaps the very holdup that kept it from being announced today, was this demand by the Iranians to lift the UN arms embargo. Now, we do not know where the situation stands right now, but you, as a U.S. Senator who will get to weigh in on this deal, could you ever support an agreement that lifted that embargo?
Well, absolutely not. I think General Dempsey was right on. Iran is one of the major sponsors of state terrorism in Iraq, in Syria with Assad, in Yemen with the Houthis, in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And the last thing we need to do is to legitimize their ability to move arms throughout the region and beyond. And there's a lot more here than meets the eye. Iran obviously wants the arms embargo lifted because that would make the sale of the S-300, which is a sophisticated Russian anti-missile defense system, much more desirable for them, and would make it much harder if Iran cheats in the future for any possible attack against their nuclear facilities.
Do you get the sense that the administration, the Secretary Kerry, in these negotiations right now will hold as firm of a line as you would like on this UN arms embargo?
I certainly hope so. We've seen a lot of our red lines become green lights. This is not one that can afford to do that for all the reasons I mentioned before. You can't have Iranians getting more sophisticated defense mechanisms that will make it even bolder for them to break out if they want to, knowing that the attack against them will be more difficult. You can't give them greater access to weapons that they can promote throughout the region, especially when we're looking at anywhere between $100 and $150 billion of relief, where they can play a lot of mischievousness beyond what they already do in the region.
It strikes me, since you have the Russians who basically say, to an extent, they want this embargo lifted, or they may want it lifted before we do, because they want to sell weapons to Iran, that it just goes to show how difficult keeping the status quo in place might be. There are people who say that no deal is better than a bad deal, but if there is no deal, how much longer can the current situation hang on? How much longer could sanctions last if Russia's getting shaky?
Well, you know, the administration itself, the president himself, has said many times no deal is better than a bad deal. Why? Because if you have an Iran that has another $150 billion, that has more sophisticated defense systems, that ultimately will have a stronger standing in the future, and they break out then your choices will be against a much more powerful opposition than it is right now. And that's part of what you have to consider. Because this deal, we're not rolling back sanctions for rolling back the nuclear infrastructure. We're rolling back sanctions for notification. That's a big difference, and that's a big risk.
Senator, you're a skeptic, and I think that's probably putting it lightly at this point. There are a lot of people who agree with you in the U.S. Congress. The Senate Congress will get a chance to look at this for 60 days if a deal is reached tomorrow. Do you think there's any way that the White House can convince skeptics like you in Congress to go along with this deal?
Well, John, I'm going to look at the totality of the agreement. Maybe they ended up a lot better than I think they did. But at the end of the day, I'm concerned about, do we have anytime, anywhere inspections? What's the pace of sanctions relief? How do we ensure that if there's a violation, it seems to me that regardless of the deal, there are two things that must happen, and that might elicit my support. Number one is the president's got to say unequivocally, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, and we will deal with it however we will have to. And it's got to be more than all options are on the table. Nobody believes that today. And secondly, you have to have defined sanctions for violations of the agreement so that the Iranians know the consequences and you don't have to go negotiate it out. If some of those elements are there, it would make it far more palatable, but we'll have to see what the agreement actually is.
We have to see, and I could find out within the next 12 to 20 hours. Senator Menendez, I hope you come back and discuss it when we do have those details. Thanks so much.